We're going to jump into the social science. I'm going to take you back to your 6th grade year, right? When you learned about the scientific method and you learned about isolating a variable and then asking a question, making an approximate guess of what's going to happen, a hypothesis, and then you just tweak that single variable and you learn. And then once you've learned, you have another question. So you end that experiment and you start another one. And then you say, okay, so let's tweak this variable, and you learn, so on and so forth. It's a bunch of repeated processes. The problem with this is that community doesn't happen in a lab. Who here has had the experience where you try to A/B test something and you're like, okay, I'm going to deliver this A/B test to 1,000 people, and then you get a clear response and it's A. And then you're like, okay, cool, great. So my super users loved this. Let's deliver it to another portion of my community. Let's deliver it to support groups or people who are internal to your community. And it works again. And you're like, awesome, they clearly enjoy A. And then you send it full wide, and then suddenly doesn't work. Everyone didn't like A, they liked B better. And you're like, what happened? What's going on? The variables were exactly the same. It was the environment, or what we call the scope, that changed. And that's the 4 major things that the social scientific process changes for you. First off, instead of running several experiments that are all separate and disparate based upon variables, we are using the exact same data that we had on day 1 to prove or disprove our hypotheses on day 20. This is very much so one long experiment. And instead of focusing on the variables, we don't change a variable, we leave the variables the same. And we simply say, these things, these variables apply to population A. What's happening to population B? Or why doesn't it apply to population C? And in doing so, what we're able to do is we're able to collect enough data over time for us to make inductive assumptions. When you look at traditional metrics, they are deductive in process. This many people perform these actions, which we think means this, which means we can manage these metrics, which means this is our dashboard. What we're doing right now is switching that paradigm. We are collecting data, and then we are saying, we found these particular themes in that data. We're going to go look for more data that either disproves or proves those themes. And the easiest way for us to do this is with 2 main processes. We're going to go over step 2, which is called coding, and then we're going to go over the rules of generalization. So codification is a process of inductive data abstraction. What that means is we are inferring from data that we've already collected that there might be a hypothesis. In anthropology, we call this grounded theory analysis. We're not going to go too much further into that, but effectively, if you look down here, you'll see someone is saying, I've gained too much weight over the last several years, and I don't seem to be doing anything to get rid of it. So what you're going to do is you're going to theme that, you're going to put a code on it that says, this is about health. And it's a negative statement about health. They're not able to use the system in order to reliably lose weight. So, and you're going to just tag data happening in your community over time. This is very qualitative, and we're essentially taking the sentiment data of our communities and inductively inferring the specific themes and principles. Instead of coming at the data with a hypothesis, we are letting the data make the hypothesis for us. And in order to do this, bit by bit, we are going to rely on something called data abstraction, or the rules of generalization. Now, in social science, there are 5 main valid ways to do this, but no one here, I believe, is looking to make an academic white paper, so you don't need to be super critical about this in your daily lives. We want to apply this to your standard area, and it just so happens that every one of these methods actually boils down to one simple formula. A concept, this thing is happening in our community, applies to B population among our user communities and our advocates, only so far as C limitation, but not with our new users or with our support groups. Why or why not? So as an example, we have a high sense of belonging among our super users, but that high sense of belonging is not reflected among our vendor contributors. What happened? The variables may not have changed, but because the scope did, there is something to be learned there. And that something to be learned can be codified, abstracted, and used for your metrics journey. Now, the easiest way to do this, as I said, here's that word again, scopes, is for you to understand and limit the various aspects of your community. So you're really mapping it out, sort of like a Venn diagram. But I want to spend a little bit of time jumping even further into this because the orbit model is, at its truth, very simplistic, and yet it's hiding a very critical anthropological concept: how people step over that membrane. So on one end, you have your observers and your users. What does that line, that membrane between observers and users actually look like? Let's borrow a different analogy. Let's say that your community is a cell, and the cell is compartmentalized based upon the purpose, the activity, how close to the DNA the organelle needs to be, and it has a series of membranes. Each time a user comes into your community, they need to see two things on that membrane. The first thing is transparency. Can they see past that barrier into the next community enough that they're willing to have value? They want to say, I want to go there. I have a reason to go there. And then once they attempt to make the cross, there's a second aspect of porosity. How easy or how difficult is it for them to transgress that membrane? It turns out that your onboarding funnels in your community borrow the same methods and context as a marketing funnel. So your marketing funnel steps are actually passing players via action through your membranes. You'll see that we have a nucleic cell of your stakeholders, and the community team is right there. Just like your audience is coming into your cell, you are setting a precedent in your team. We want to perform this action in the community. And then you are doing it with active promoters. And then you're doing it again with engaged members. And then you're doing it again with everyone else. So the teams care about precedent and momentum. The community cares about behaviors and sentiment. But your C-suite, they care about the health of the cell. Is the cell about to blow up? Is the cell making us money? Is it ready to split? Is it growing? So what they care about is the results and how. And the easiest way to do this, to measure this, is to build your dashboards along with the layers of abstraction from behaviors and sentiment at the bottom with more detail to a greater scope of results and how.